What's going on, my dear friends? Today in this video, let's learn and master the Angular framework's latest version. So let's get started. Alright guys, in the previous section, we learned about Angular template driven forms. So during that lesson, I gave you a brief introduction to how forms work in Angular and how to work with template driven forms. So now in this lecture, we'll dive deeper into reactive forms and how they differ from template driven forms. So as you guys know, in Angular, we have two key classes for managing forms. This FormGroup and the FormControl classes. So we learned about this in detail in the previous lecture. So guys, in order to convert a regular HTML form into an Angular form, we need to create instances of these classes. So we create a new instance of FormGroup for the entire form and a new instance of FormControl for each input field in the form. So in template driven forms, if you can remember, to create these new instances, we used the directives like ngForm and the ngModel to bind the form and to handle the form's data. We used the ngForm to generate the FormGroup class, and we used the ngModel directive to generate the new instance of FormControl class. So guys, in the template driven forms, most of the logic such as declarations and the form validations was done directly in the HTML template. We didn't touch the components.ts file for this. We did it all inside the HTML template file, right? So however, with reactive forms, we'll handle everything like form structure, validations and form state all inside the component class itself. So let's quickly look at an example so you guys can understand this clearly. So guys, for this, first thing first, we need an HTML form. So for this also we'll use the same Angular form as the previous form. So let's duplicate this previous form and remove the previous ngForm and the ngModel directives. Now as you guys can see, this is just a simple HTML form. Next, what we have to do here is we have to convert this HTML form into an Angular reactive form. So guys, how do we do that? Yes, of course. So as I said before, in this reactive form approach, we'll do all the main things inside the component.ts file, not inside the HTML or the template file. Alright, so guys, now this is just a simple form. This form is not functional. Even if we submit this form, nothing will happen. So first thing first guys, if we want to capture this input field value, how do we capture that? For this, previously we used the ngModel directive. So once again, this directive will create the FormControl class new instance, right? So the same thing we have to do in the reactive form approach as well. So but in a different way. So what we do here is we'll simply create this FormControl's new instance inside of the component.ts file. So go to the component.ts file and write this code. So inside the class scope, guys, how do we create a new instance of a class? Yes, of course, for this we'll use the new keyword. So here new and the class name FormControl. Follow these capital simple letters carefully. So after this, add the parentheses. That's it. So this is how we create a new instance of a class, right? So this is not something Angular. This is just simple JavaScript, right? Alright, so next, as you guys can see here, we are getting this error. Cannot find the name FormControl. So what is this error? Can you guys tell me? Yes, of course. So guys, in order to use this FormControl class in here, we have to import that to this component class. Otherwise, this cannot recognize exactly what is this FormControl. So that's why we are getting this error. So in order to fix this error, we have to add this import statement. So up here, add this import and inside curly brackets, the class name is FormControl. Follow this capital simple letters exactly same as this. otherwise this won't work. So after this, at the import path, so guys, this is coming from the @angular/forms module. That's it. Now if you look at this carefully, still we are getting this error. This time we are getting this red underline under this new keyword. So guys, what is this error? Guys, when we create this new instance, this will return the entire class structure, including all the variables and methods and all the logic that is contained inside this FormControl class. So in order to capture those returning values, we have to assign this to a variable, right? Otherwise we cannot capture those class variables. So in order to prevent this error, so let's assign this to a variable, something called let's name it fname, and add the equal sign. That's it. So as you guys can see here, now we are not getting any errors. Alright, so now save this all and go to the browser. As you guys can see here, now we are not getting any errors, which means we successfully created this new instance of the FormControl class. Wait, so let's log this, then we can see this clearly. So inside the constructor method, if you don't have the constructor method inside the component file, just simply create this. Just add the method name as constructor and simply add the parentheses and the method scope, right? So now inside this, simply log this FormControl instance which assigned to this fname variable. That's it. So save this and go to the browser. Now open the browser console. Inside this we can see our log which printed this massive object. So guys, what is this? Can you guys tell me? Yes, of course, this is the FormControl new instance. So if you guys can remember, we got the same object when we're dealing with the template driven forms, but the only difference here is in template driven forms we use the ng model directive for this, but in here we created this manually. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright guys, let's continue from where we left off. So we have successfully created a new instance of the FormControl class and logged it to the console. Now let's take this a step further and actually bind this FormControl instance to our HTML input field. This is where the magic of reactive forms starts to happen. So we have created the FormControl instance in our component class, right? But right now it's just sitting there in the TypeScript file. It's not connected to our HTML form in any way. To make this connection, we need to use Angular FormControl directive in the HTML template. So let's go back to our HTML file. If you can remember, we already created this form. Now inside this form, let's bind this full name input field into the fname FormControl. How do we do that? Guys, nothing much here, very simple. For this we have a special type of directive called FormControl. So inside this input tag, add the directive inside of square brackets. The directive name is FormControl. So after this, bind this to the FormControl instance, which is this fname. That's it. So guys, in here we are telling Angular to bind the fname FormControl instance to this input field. So this directive is what connects the FormControl instance, which is in our TypeScript file, to this actual input file in the HTML template. So hope you guys got the idea. Alright, so before we move on, you guys can see in here we have a compiler say something like can't bind to FormControl since it isn't known a property of input. So this is because this, like with the FormControl class, we need to import the necessary module to use the FormControl directive as well. So guys, in order to solve this error, we have to import the reactive forms module to this component. So go to the app.component.ts file. Inside the imports array, and the module name is reactive forms module. So select this autocomplete. This will add the import statement. Now go to the HTML file. Now we cannot find the error, which means we successfully connected the input field into the fname FormControl. So guys, now using this we can simply access the value of this input. Wait, I'll show you one example. So down here, simply add a string interpolation and inside that add this. this form control instance, which is this f name. After this, in order to access the value of this input field, we have to use the value method, right? So we already learned about this when we're dealing with template driven forms. So after this, add this dot value, and at last wrap this inside of a p tag. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser, start typing something inside this input field, and you will see that the value you type is displayed in real time below the form inside this p tag. So can you guys tell me how we are getting this value down here? Nothing much here. We have bound this input field to this form control instance using the form control directive, right? So when we are typing this will automatically bind this input field's value into the form control class value method. So this is how we are getting these values. So guys, almost similar to the previous approach, but in template driven we used only the ng model directive. It's added all the logics, but in reactive forms we created the new instance manually and we bound the input using the form control reactive form directive. So from the top view, you guys may think if we can do this easily using ng model, then why do we need this reactive forms module? It's a valid thought, but in reactive forms module, since we are creating all the instances from scratch, we are getting more control over template driven forms, and it's very useful when it comes to a real world example. So you guys will understand this in next few lectures. Alright, so now in this lecture, let's see how we can bind the form control instances to the rest of inputs. So guys, for this we have to create separate new instances of the form control classes for this email and address input. We cannot use the same fname form control instance to other inputs as well. So if you can remember, we added the ng model directive to all of the inputs, right? So each and every ng model created the new form control instances for each input. So hope you guys remember this. So guys, in this reactive form approach, we have to do this manually, right? So back to the components file. So again, create another variable name something email and assign this to a form controls new instance. So new keyword, and after this form control, and don't forget to add the parentheses. So guys, now we have to connect this email form control new instance to the email input inside the HTML template. So how do we do that? Can you guys tell me? Yes, of course. For this, simply we can use the form control directive. So inside the email input, add the square brackets. Inside that, add the directive, which is this form control. So now bind this to the email form controls new instance. For this also, for now, let's add a string interpolation down here so we can check whether this is working or not. So down here, add a p tag and add this string interpolation. So this time, the form control new instance is this email. So email dot value. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. Type something inside this email input field. As you guys can see here, when we're typing inside the email input, we are getting the typed value displaying under this input in real time, which means the second form control also working as we expected. Perfect. Alright, so before we move on, a quick small task for you. Try to make this address text area also functional like the other inputs using the reactive form approach. But guys, this time you have to deal with the input text area, not just a text field, right? So guys, alright, so guys, pause this lecture and complete this task. Take your time and just try to do this on your own. Once you complete the task, come back and continue this lecture. Perfect. So I hope you guys completed the task well. So let's continue. So guys, for this also the same approach as previous. So first thing first, create the new instance of the form control. So in the component class, create the new instance. So the variable name is set something address equal sign new keyword. After this, the class name form control, and at last add the parentheses. Awesome. Alright, next we have to bind this to the address text area. So again, same approach, we have to use the form control directive. So inside the text area opening tag, add the form control directive inside of square brackets and bind this to the address form controls new instance. So for this also, let's add the string interpolation down here. Let's copy and paste the previous one and change this variable name to address. That's it. So save this all and go to the browser. Now type something inside the addressed text area. As you guys can see here, we are getting this typing value down here, which means we successfully bound this text area to the form control class. Perfect. Alright, so far we have learned how to capture input values using form control and display them in real time. Now in this lecture, let's dive into how to submit the form and handle the form data properly. As I mentioned earlier, we can technically capture the values of individual form controls using the value method and use them for data manipulations. This is what we did with these string interpolations, right? But here is the thing. This approach isn't scalable or maintainable. Imagine you have a form with 10 or 20 fields. Manually accessing each form control's value would make your code messy and hard to maintain. That's why Angular provides a better way to handle form submissions using FormGroup. So guys, in reactive forms, form group is a collection of form control instances. It allows us to manage multiple form controls as a single unit. When we submit the form, we can access the values of all the form controls at once using the form group's value property. So if you can remember, when we learning template driven forms, we used ngForm directive to handle the entire form. So in behind the scenes, that ngForm directive also creates this form group class new instance. So in the reactive form approach, as you guys know, in order to use the form group class, we have to create this new instance manually. So same like the previous form control new instances. So guys, let's quickly look at an example so you guys can understand this better. Alright, so first thing first, we have to create the new instance of the form group class. So go to the component.ts file and after this create the new instance of the form group. So guys, how do we do that? Can you guys tell me? Yes, of course, same as previous. First add the new keyword and after this the class name which is this form group class. Follow this naming convention same as this, right? So after this add the parentheses. So guys, as you guys can see here, we are getting this compile error. So in order to prevent this, we have to import the form group class to this component.ts file. So up here inside this same form control import, add the form group, and this also coming from this same Angular forms module, right? So next guys, simply store this value inside of a variable. Let's name this variable as user form. That's it. So now we have the form group's new instance. So next what do we have to do here is we have to connect these HTML forms with the form group's new instance. So can you guys tell me how do we do that? Yes, of course, nothing much here, same like previous form control approach. So guys, for this also we have a special directive called form group. So let's do this. Inside the form tag and the directive inside of a square brackets, and the directive is form group. Now bind this to the form group new instance, which is this user form, right? So that's it. We successfully bound this HTML form to the form group's new instance. So guys, in order to capture the values of this form, we have to submit this form. So for this, we have to use the ng-submit directive, right? So we learned about this in the template driven form section. So guys, we have to use this ng-submit directive to submit a form in Angular, even this is a template driven or reactive form. For both form types, we have to use this same ng-submit directive, right? So we'll dive deeper into in the next lecture. Alright guys, so in this lecture let's look at how to submit this form. So guys, as I said, for this also we have to use the ng submit directive, right? So this is kind of like a event binding. Alright, so let's do this. Inside the form tag, add the ng submit directive and wrap this inside of a brackets, right? Next, from this submit event, let's call a method something on submit. For the previous template driven form also we used the same method, right? So let's change this method name to something on submit r. So use this capital simple letters as it is, right? This r is something for reactive. Alright, so next add the method parentheses. Guys, still we don't have this method, so that's why we are getting this compile error. So head back to the component.ts file and create this method. The method name is onSubmit r and the method parentheses and the method scope. Now inside this, let's log the form group's new instance so we can see what data we have inside this form group instance. So inside the console log parentheses add this form group instance variable name, which is this user form. That's it. Now save this all and go to the browser. Now fill out this form and click on this submit button. Inside the browser console, as you guys can see here, we got this massive ng form object. Under this, we have so many sub objects and methods. But for now, let's quickly look inside the value object. So expand this. What's going on, guys? This value object is empty. We are supposed to get the values of the form controls. But in here, we are getting an empty value object. What is the problem? Can you guys tell me? Guys, the problem here is that we haven't registered any of our form control with the form group instance. Even though we created all these form controls individually, we need to add them to the form group so they can be managed together. So we need to pass these form controls as an object to this form group constructor to fix this issue. So let's see this in action. So just simply pass this all form control to this form group new instance as a parameter. So we have to pass this as a object. So inside this form group new instance parentheses open and close curly brackets, cut all these form controls new instances and paste it inside this object space. And at last, don't forget to add the commas to separate each object values. So now again we are getting these errors. Why is that? Inside of objects we cannot use this equal sign, right? So in order to fix this, replace all these equal signs with colon symbol. That's it. So now we successfully registered all our form controls with the form group instance. Wait guys, we have another problem here. Inside the HTML template, we are getting this compile error under this form control directive. So what is this? The issue is that when we register form control with the form group, we can't use the form control directive anymore. Instead, we need to use form control name directive to bind the form controls. So this is because the form controls are now part of a group and need to be accessed through the group's structure. So previously we created this form control new instant and assigned that to a variable. Then we use the form control directive to bind those form control to the HTML template. But now, since we are using a form group, we need to use form control name instead. So this is the key difference. Form control name is specifically designed to work with form controls that are part of a form group. So guys, let's update our HTML template to use form control name instead of form control directive. So inside each input field and text area, replace form control directive with form control name without the square brackets. So carefully follow these capital simple letters. Now do the same for email and for the address fields. So guys, remember that the form control name value should match exactly with the key names we used in our form group object. So hope you guys got the idea. That's it. So save this all and now go to the browser. Fill out the form fields with some test data and click on the submit button. Now check the browser console, expand the value object, and as you guys can see here, we are getting all our form control values stored inside this value object. This is exactly what we wanted. Now our form group is properly managing all the form controls. So that's why we are getting all of the form control values. So guys, now using this form group value object, we can do our data manipulations, right? For example, we can send this form data to an API endpoint, validate the input values, or perform any other operations we need. The form group give us a clean, organized way to access all the form control values in one place. This makes it much easier to handle form submission and process the collected data in our Angular application.